Happy wife, happy life. You've heard it hundreds, maybe even thousands of times. It's one of those phrases people repeat like it's obvious wisdom. People say it at weddings. Friends say it jokingly to each other. Men repeat it like it's just part of the deal. And most of the time when it's said, everyone laughs. But when you slow down and actually think about what that phrase means, something about it feels off. And then you realize it's one of the most toxic phrases ever created. What does this phrase even actually mean? If you want peace in your own home, you just do whatever your wife wants? Because that doesn't sound like a partnership. That sounds like obedience. Because the message underneath it is very clear. The stability of the relationship depends on the woman's happiness. Not both people, just one. And when you really look at that idea, it raises an important question. If a woman's happiness becomes the center of the relationship, where does the man's happiness fit in? What's interesting is that this phrase is usually presented as something healthy, almost like relationship wisdom. But when you really examine it, the expectation behind this phrase is extremely unhealthy because it quietly places a responsibility on the man that no human being should have, the responsibility to maintain another person's emotional state. And that's where the phrase becomes toxic. Not because wanting your partner to be happy is wrong. Of course you want your partner to be happy. That's natural. But happy wife, happy life isn't describing mutual care. The phrase carries a very different expectation. It implies that the man's role is to keep the woman happy, to maintain her mood, to avoid upsetting her, to organize his behavior around preventing conflict. And when you really think about that dynamic, something subtle begins to happen. The relationship is no longer a partnership. It becomes emotional management. The man begins adjusting himself, not once, constantly. He becomes careful about what he says. He avoids certain conversations. He keeps opinions to himself that might otherwise create tension. He starts walking on eggshells in his own home. And here's the part most men don't recognize right away. When someone spends years managing another person's happiness, their own needs slowly begin to disappear. Not suddenly, gradually. Because the entire focus of the relationship becomes keeping the peace, keeping her satisfied, keeping everything calm. And when a man lives that way long enough, something inside him changes. His voice becomes quieter. His expectations become smaller. He stops raising concerns because he already knows the response will be frustration or conflict. So he adapts. He withdraws. And this is why so many men live quiet lives of desperation, because they've spent years setting aside their own needs in order to maintain someone else's emotional comfort. They convince themselves this is simply what relationships require. I've heard many men say that they love seeing their wife happy. Of course we want our loved ones to be happy, but here's the actual problem. When you look at that mentality and dynamic honestly, it isn't healthy. Where does your happiness as a man fit in? When do your needs get met? This is not balance, and it certainly isn't respect, because a relationship that revolves around one person's happiness will eventually erase the other person's voice. And what's interesting is how rarely people flip this phrase around to hear how ridiculous it actually sounds. Imagine a man saying something like, "Please your man the best you can." There wouldn't be laughter. There would be immediate backlash. People would call it toxic, controlling, misogynistic. They would say that a man has no right to expect that kind of sacrifice from a woman, And they would certainly say, "Who the hell do men think they are?" But when the expectation flows in the opposite direction, when a man is expected to organize his behavior around keeping a woman happy, suddenly it's treated like great wisdom. Like that's simply how relationships work. And that double standard reveals the real problem with the phrase, because it quietly teaches men that their peace comes second, their needs come second, their voice comes second. And as long as she's happy, everything is fine. But a relationship built on that kind of imbalance cannot remain in a healthy state. Eventually, the pressure becomes too heavy, and pressure always turns into resentment. Because when a man spends years adjusting himself to maintain someone else's emotional comfort, he eventually begins to feel invisible. Not valued, just necessary. And that's the part men rarely acknowledge when they live by this ridiculous lie. A healthy relationship doesn't operate this way, because in a healthy relationship, neither person is responsible for managing the other person's emotional state. Both people care about each other, of course they do, but caring about someone and carrying the weight of their happiness are two very different things. Happiness is not something another person can maintain for you. It has to come from within. Each person is responsible for managing their own emotional state. No partner can constantly regulate another person's emotional state without eventually losing themselves in the process. But when both people understand that, something important changes. The relationship becomes calmer. And yes, there will still be disagreements. But now no one is living in fear of upsetting the other person. A man is no longer managing the emotional temperature of the room, and he is no longer walking on eggshells in his own home. Both people simply show up as themselves. That's what a real partnership actually looks like. Not happy wife, happy life. Just two people, two voices, two sets of needs, both acknowledged, both matter. Because the truth is, no man should have to disappear inside his own relationship just to keep the peace. Real partnership doesn't ask one person to shrink. It asks both people to stand fully in who they are. And when that balance exists, you don't spend your life trying to manage someone else's happiness. You simply build a life together.